Right now, while you're watching this, the Earth is trembling in several different places on this planet, all at the same time. Venezuela just got hammered by two earthquakes that struck back-to-back within 39 seconds of one another. Japan recorded a magnitude 7.4 event that triggered a full tsunami warning. California researchers published a major study this month, concluding that the San Andreas fault system has reached its highest stress level in 1,000 years. And the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, and Nicaragua were all shaken within the same 7-day span. This isn't ordinary news cycle background noise. Something significant is unfolding across several fault systems simultaneously, and today we're breaking down exactly what's going on, where the danger is greatest, and whether things could escalate further. No speculation, no dramatics, just the facts, the science, and the actual stakes involved. Drop a comment right now. Have you ever personally felt an earthquake? A small tremor, a moderate shake, or something strong enough to knock furniture around? Tell me where you were and what it felt like. Thousands of you come from earthquake-prone countries, and I always love reading those stories. If you want to be first to know whenever something major happens geologically, subscribe to the channel. It's completely free, and a thumbs up helps enormously. Let's push for 5,000 likes on this one so the algorithm actually puts it in front of people who need to see it. Thank you. Now let's get into it. On June 24, 2026, Venezuela was struck by what is now officially the most powerful earthquake sequence the country has experienced since the year 1900. I'm choosing the word sequence deliberately because this wasn't a single earthquake. It was two massive seismic events striking within 39 seconds of each other. 39 seconds. That's barely enough time to duck under a table, let alone get outside. The first quake registered magnitude 7.2. The second, the main shock, came in at 7.5. Both epicenters sat in the Yaracuy region of northwestern Venezuela, near the town of Yumare, west of the state capital San Felipe. USGS analysis identified both events as strike-slip earthquakes, meaning the ground on either side of the fault slid horizontally past itself. Some geophysicists, working with different measurement models, have argued the combined energy release is better described as a single complex rupture approaching magnitude 7.8. Now let's break down why these numbers translate into catastrophe, because a lot of people glance at a magnitude figure and treat it as just an abstract number on a scale. First, depth. These quakes were dangerously shallow. When a rupture happens deep underground, say 100 kilometers or more beneath the surface, much of the seismic energy gets absorbed by the layers of rock between the rupture and the surface, and the shaking people actually feel is significantly softened. When the rupture is shallow, and this one sat at roughly 10 kilometers deep, nearly all of that energy slams into the surface at full strength, with almost no geological cushioning to protect the buildings sitting directly above the epicenter. Second, the buildings themselves. Venezuela has been mired in a severe economic crisis for years. Infrastructure maintenance has been minimal. Construction standards in low-income neighborhoods, which also happen to be the most densely populated areas, have gone largely unenforced. Hundreds of thousands of people live inside unreinforced brick and concrete block structures that were never engineered to flex and absorb seismic shaking. When the ground lurched violently twice in under a minute, those buildings didn't bend, they came down. In the state of La Guaira, the coastal region north of Caracas, sitting directly above the rupture zone, reports indicate that 80% of buildings collapsed. Entire streets were buried. Caracas itself endured a full 60 seconds of shaking, sending millions of people fleeing into the streets in panic. The international airport sustained damage. Power was cut across huge swaths of the region. Mobile networks failed entirely, meaning families couldn't reach one another and rescue crews couldn't coordinate their response. The USD's pager system, the agency's rapid impact assessment tool for global earthquakes, immediately calculated a 44% probability that the final death toll would land somewhere between 10,000 and 100,000 people, and a 30% probability of it exceeding 100,000. Sit with those numbers for a second. As of when this video was made, the confirmed death toll had climbed past 3,800, with over 16,700 reported injured. But every expert following the situation closely says those confirmed figures are a severe undercount. Multiple missing persons tracking databases put the number of unaccounted for people somewhere between 31,000 and over 50,000. The UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher, stated that more than 50,000 people remained missing. A forensic pathologist working inside La Guaira, who asked not to be named for fear of government retaliation, told CNN that the official death count represented, in her own words, not even a third of the actual toll. The makeshift morgue at her facility was processing roughly 400 bodies a day. Refrigerated trucks had reached full capacity, and body bags were being left outside in the June heat because there was simply no space left indoors. Decomposition was accelerating fast, and identifying victims was becoming nearly impossible. Venezuela's government declared a national emergency, and international rescue teams began arriving. But here's the cruel compounding factor. Venezuela was already in crisis long before any of this happened. Nearly 8 million people were already in need of humanitarian assistance before the earthquake struck. The healthcare system was already stretched to its limit, with barely functioning hospitals across large stretches of the country, minimal medical supply stockpiles, and a government that had spent years internationally isolated. NASA satellite imagery of the affected zone suggested that far more than the roughly 700 buildings the government initially acknowledged as damaged or destroyed, the true number was closer to 59,000 buildings, including hospitals and schools, either destroyed or severely compromised. The UN Development Program placed the economic damage somewhere between $4.7 and $8.7 billion. Other UN estimates put total losses, including infrastructure, at $37 billion, roughly 6% of Venezuela's entire GDP, erased in under a minute. The human stories emerging from the disaster zone are gutting. Families scattered across other continents are posting to social media, holding up photographs of missing grandparents, begging for help locating survivors trapped in specific collapsed buildings. One family, with relatives in Spain and Orlando, Florida, was searching for grandparents who lived in a 7-story building in the town of Carabayeda. International rescue workers told them a crane would be needed just to shift the massive concrete slabs before any search could even begin. Without heavy equipment, they couldn't get anywhere close. This is what a magnitude 7.5 earthquake does to a city that was never built to survive it. And that's precisely why every other earthquake story we're covering today matters. The planet doesn't adjust its behavior based on a country's economic circumstances. Now let's talk about Japan, the blueprint for survival. Around the same time the world was watching Venezuela's horror unfold, Japan recorded its own major seismic event, and the contrast between the two outcomes teaches us something fundamental about earthquake risk in the modern era. On April 20th, 2026, a magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck off the Sanriku coast of northeastern Japan, along the Japan Trench. Japan's own meteorological agency initially clocked it at magnitude 7.7 before settling on the final figure. Shaking was felt from the northern island of Hokkaido all the way down to Aichi Prefecture in central Japan, meaning tens of millions of people experienced this earthquake directly. A CNN producer reporting from Tokyo described feeling the building sway for roughly 7 minutes straight. Immediately after the quake, Japanese authorities issued a 3-meter tsunami warning covering Iwate Prefecture and parts of Hokkaido and Aomori. Emergency evacuation orders went out to roughly 44,000 people in Hokkaido alone, and coastal residents moved to higher ground. An 80-centimeter tsunami wave was recorded at Kuji Port in Iwate Prefecture. The warning was later downgraded to an advisory and eventually lifted entirely. The final confirmed damage, roughly 200 power outages, 2 people injured from falls, 0 deaths, 0 collapsed buildings. Read that back one more time. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake, a tsunami warning, 7 minutes of shaking felt across a country of 125 million people, 2 injuries, nobody killed. The contrast with Venezuela isn't a matter of luck, and it isn't because the earthquake itself was somehow different. A 7.4 in Japan versus a 7.5 in Venezuela is essentially an identical geological event. The difference comes down entirely to what human beings built and prepared over the decades leading up to those earthquakes. Japan operates under some of the strictest seismic building codes anywhere on the planet, and those codes get regularly revised as new research comes in. Buildings are specifically engineered to sway and flex instead of collapsing outright. The country has invested heavily in base isolation technology, essentially giant shock absorbers built directly into building foundations. Train systems automatically slow down and stop the moment seismic sensors detect unusual ground movement. Hospital emergency systems are designed to keep functioning through major earthquakes. And starting from elementary school, Japanese children drill earthquake response until it becomes muscle memory. After the April quake, Japan issued what's called a megaquake advisory, and it's worth understanding exactly what that means. It is not a prediction. It's a formal government statement declaring that the short-term probability of a magnitude 8 or stronger earthquake has temporarily risen above background levels. In this instance, the weekly probability climbed to 1%, compared with a normal background rate of 0.1%, a tenfold increase. Japanese authorities urged residents across 182 towns spanning 7 prefectures to double-check their evacuation routes and confirm the location of their nearest shelter, not out of panic, but as routine precaution that the population is trained to take seriously. The geological context here matters enormously. Japan sits at the convergence point of 4 tectonic plates: the Pacific Plate, the North American Plate, the Eurasian Plate, and the Philippine Sea Plate. It accounts for roughly 10% of all earthquakes worldwide, and about 20% of all magnitude 6 or higher earthquakes anywhere on Earth happen in or around Japan. The country averages 1,500 felt earthquakes every year. This isn't a country that occasionally has earthquakes. This is a country that exists permanently inside seismic activity. The April 2026 Sanriku earthquake struck along the same stretch of the Japan Trench that produced the 2011 Tohoku disaster, a magnitude 9.1 event and the fourth strongest earthquake ever recorded in history. That 2011 tsunami killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The same coastline, the same tectonic system. 15 years later, a magnitude 7.4 quake, smaller but still enormously powerful, killed nobody at all. Japan has demonstrated something important to the rest of the world. The death toll from an earthquake isn't determined by geology alone. It's determined by decisions made by governments and societies years and decades before the ground ever starts shaking. Now let's turn to California, because what scientists just discovered and published about the San Andreas Fault System in June 2026 is one of the most alarming findings in recent earthquake science. A team led by Dr. Luhendra Oja and Dr. Lilian Burkhardt of the University of Bern, Switzerland, published research in the Journal of Geophysical Research, Solid Earth. With a conclusion as straightforward as it is serious, the San Andreas Fault System in Southern California has now reached its highest stress level in the past 1,000 years. Let's unpack what that actually means. Faults work like this. Two tectonic plates grind against one another, straining to move, but friction locks them together near the surface and in the upper crust. The plates continue moving at depth, but the locked section can't slip freely, so instead of releasing energy through motion, the system stores it as elastic stress in the surrounding rock, essentially squeezing and bending the crust. This continues for years, decades, sometimes centuries. Eventually, once the accumulated stress exceeds what the rock can hold, the fault suddenly slips, and all of that stored energy is released at once as an earthquake. The longer a fault segment stays locked without rupturing, the more energy builds up, and the more energy that builds up, the larger the potential earthquake once it finally releases. The southern San Andreas Fault last ruptured in a major event back in 1857, the Fort Tejon earthquake, estimated at magnitude 7.9. That was 169 years ago. For 169 consecutive years, the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate have been grinding against one another along this fault at a rate of roughly 5 centimeters a year, without a major release. All of that motion has to go somewhere, and it's gone into stress stored in the rock. Dr. Burkhardt's team built a physics-based four-dimensional computer model simulating 1,000 years of earthquake history along both the San Andreas and the adjacent San Jacinto fault systems. They fed the model geological evidence, radiocarbon dating of displaced sediment, tree ring records documenting past ground ruptures, and centuries of historical observation, then ran the simulation forward to the present day to calculate current stress levels. The finding, stress on multiple fault segments, now sits at or above the highest values observed anywhere across the entire 1,000-year simulation. The system isn't approaching a critical threshold. According to the model, it's already crossed it. But the research turned up a second discovery that makes the whole situation even more complex and potentially more dangerous. The San Andreas and San Jacinto fault systems intersect at a geographic junction called Cajon Pass, located roughly 50 miles northeast of downtown Los Angeles. This junction, the researchers found, can function as what they're calling an earthquake gate. Under the right conditions, a rupture traveling along the San Andreas can pass through Cajon Pass and jump onto the San Jacinto fault, turning what would have been a single fault event into a multi-fault rupture. A joint rupture crossing Cajon Pass could, according to the study, produce an earthquake between magnitude 7.4 and 7.8, one that wouldn't stay confined to a single fault corridor, but would simultaneously threaten the Los Angeles Basin, San Bernardino, Riverside County, and the Coachella Valley. Right now, stress levels on both fault systems are running so close together and at such elevated levels that the earthquake gate is effectively unlocked. The conditions for a joint rupture are already in place. USGS geologist Kate Scherer, a co-author of the study, put it directly, because such a long time has passed since either fault system produced a major earthquake, the accumulated stress is enormous. USC seismologist Yehuda Ben Zion, director of the statewide California Earthquake Center, offered this when asked when the next big event might strike. It could be today, tomorrow, in 10 years, or in 30. On geological timescales, there's essentially no meaningful difference between those options. The consequences of a magnitude 7.5 to 7.8 event striking this corridor would be severe. The Los Angeles metropolitan area holds over 13 million people. Local soil composition varies dramatically, and certain areas, particularly those built on river sediment or reclaimed land, amplify seismic waves significantly. Thousands of older, soft-story apartment buildings constructed in the 1960s and 70s are known to be highly vulnerable. Gas mains, water pipes, and electrical networks all cross active fault traces. A major simultaneous rupture along both systems would likely trigger widespread fires from broken gas lines, water main failures that hamper firefighting, severed transportation routes including major freeways and rail lines, and hospital systems overwhelmed at precisely the moment they're needed most. Dr. Burkhardt's message to policymakers and emergency managers was unambiguous. Plan for a joint rupture of both fault systems as a realistic possibility, not some remote worst-case scenario. The time to act is now, not after the earthquake. When you lay all of this side by side, Venezuela, Japan, California, plus a 6.5 magnitude quake in the Philippines, a series of tremors rattling Papua New Guinea, and a 5.2 registered in Nicaragua, the natural human instinct is to look for a connection. Is something different happening right now? Is the planet more seismically active than usual? The honest scientific answer is no, but the full picture is more nuanced than a flat denial. Earth experiences thousands of earthquakes every single day. The overwhelming majority are far too small to feel without instruments. Those large enough to actually feel number in the hundreds daily, worldwide. Magnitude 6 or above happens roughly 120 to 140 times a year on average, about once every 3 days somewhere on the planet. When several significant earthquakes occur within the same week, that's statistically expected, not anomalous. The tectonic systems behind Venezuela's disaster and Japan's earthquake are geologically independent and physically separated by thousands of kilometers. Venezuela sits along the boundary between the South American plate and the Caribbean plate, a transformed fault system running east-west across the continent's northern edge. Japan sits at a subduction zone where the Pacific plate dives beneath the Okhotsk microplate and its neighboring plates. These systems have no meaningful seismological connection to one another. Venezuela's earthquakes did not cause Japan's earthquake. There's no geological relationship between them whatsoever. What this recent cluster of activity actually reflects is something simpler and far more important: the Pacific Ring of Fire, a roughly 40,000-kilometer horseshoe-shaped arc of tectonic plate boundaries wrapping around the Pacific Ocean, is, as it always has been, extremely active. Japan, the Philippines, Papua New Guinea, California, Mexico, Chile, and New Zealand all sit along or near this arc. The Ring of Fire accounts for roughly 90% of the world's earthquakes and about 75% of its active volcanoes. Monitor global seismic activity across any given week, and you'll almost always find multiple events in this region, because it genuinely never stops. What's changed isn't the geology, it's the number of humans now living directly in its path, and how many of those humans occupy structures and cities incapable of withstanding what the geology will, sooner or later, inevitably deliver. This is really the central issue. The global urban population has exploded over the past 70 years, and a massive share of that growth has clustered in cities sitting near active fault zones: Tokyo, Jakarta, Manila, Karachi, Los Angeles, Istanbul, Mexico City, Lima, and Bogota, all major cities within reach of a major seismic event. The question that keeps geologists and disaster risk specialists up at night isn't whether these places will eventually be struck. They will be. The real question is what condition their buildings, infrastructure, and emergency systems will be in when it happens. Let's be direct about the practical takeaway here, because information without action is just anxiety. Venezuela's tragedy was made significantly worse by conditions that developed over years and decades leading up to June 24th. An economy in collapse meant building maintenance kept getting deferred indefinitely. Widespread poverty meant millions of families lived in structures that were never seismically sound to start with. Political instability meant emergency preparedness systems went chronically underfunded and underpracticed. The result? A 7.5 magnitude earthquake, already catastrophic by any measure, became something far worse than it needed to be. Japan's story runs the opposite direction. Over generations, Japan built a culture and infrastructure specifically oriented around seismic resilience. That kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't come cheap. It requires sustained political will, ongoing investment, public education, and constant practice. But the 2026 outcome speaks for itself. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake that would have been a major disaster almost anywhere else in the world became, in Japan, a manageable emergency with minimal casualties. California sits somewhere in between. The state has made real progress on seismic preparedness. The Shake Alert Earthquake Early Warning System is now active statewide and provides anywhere from seconds to tens of seconds of advance notice before shaking hits. Building codes for new construction are strong, but retrofitting older, vulnerable buildings has moved slowly. Funding for emergency preparedness in lower-income communities remains inconsistent, and the gap between what scientists understand about the risk and what the general public understands remains wide. Here's what you personally can control right now, wherever you happen to live. You probably can't retrofit your building overnight, but you can put together 72 hours of emergency supplies: water, food, first aid, flashlights, medications. You can find out where your home's gas shutoff valve is located. You can strap down your water heater and bolt heavy furniture to the wall. You can set up a communication plan with your family for when mobile networks go down. You can memorize your neighborhood's evacuation routes. None of this takes more than an afternoon to put together, and in a major earthquake, these are exactly the details that separate getting through the emergency from not getting through it. If you're in Japan, you already know all of this by heart. If you're in California, the risk is real and climbing. The research published this month isn't background noise. And if you're in Venezuela right now, the priority is your safety and connecting with relief organizations on the ground. Final thought: this planet has been doing this for 4.5 billion years. Tectonic plates have been drifting, faults have been slipping, and energy has been releasing as earthquakes since long before any human being ever set foot on the surface. It will keep happening long after we're all gone. We have no ability to stop earthquakes. We have no reliable way to predict exactly when the next one will strike. What we can do, what Japan has proven to the entire world is genuinely achievable, is choose how prepared we are for when they arrive. The death toll of any earthquake is a geological event combined with a human decision. Venezuela showed the world what happens when poverty, political instability, and inadequate infrastructure collide with a magnitude 7.5 earthquake. Japan showed the world what happens when a society takes geological reality seriously across decades and prepares accordingly. California remains the biggest open question right now. The most recent science tells us Southern California's fault systems are sitting at stress levels not seen in 1,000 years. The big one isn't a Hollywood concept anymore. It's a geological inevitability sitting closer to the present than at any point in the last millennium, and what happens when it finally arrives will depend enormously on decisions being made right now by city planners, engineers, politicians, and ordinary residents alike. We'll keep tracking everything as it unfolds: every aftershock sequence in Venezuela, every new seismic reading along the San Andreas, every advisory coming out of Japan. Subscribe so you don't miss any of it, and drop that comment below. Have you ever been in an earthquake? Tell me where and what it felt like, because these aren't just geological events, they're human experiences, and staying connected to that is what keeps us motivated to take this seriously. Let's get 5,000 likes on this video. See you in the next one. A note on the numbers, because they're worth understanding properly. One thing that trips a lot of people up when earthquake news breaks is the magnitude scale itself. They hear 7.2 and 7.5 and figure that's barely a difference, two whole numbers apart, on a scale that goes up to 10. But here's where the math turns brutal. The moment magnitude scale used by the USGs and most international agencies is logarithmic, not linear. That means every whole number step represents roughly a 10-fold increase in ground-shaking amplitude and roughly 31 times more energy released. So a magnitude 7.5 earthquake doesn't release a bit more energy than a magnitude 6.5, it releases roughly 31 times more. A magnitude 8 releases about 1,000 times more energy than a magnitude 6. This is exactly why scientists grow noticeably more concerned once numbers climb past 7. The energy gap between a 6 and a 7 is already massive, and the jump from 7 to 8 is even more extreme. In practical terms, a magnitude 6 earthquake releases energy roughly equivalent to 15,000 tons of TNT detonating simultaneously underground. A magnitude 7 releases energy equivalent to roughly 475,000 tons of TNT, comparable to the explosive power of about 38 Hiroshima-scale atomic bombs. Venezuela's 7.5 main shock released energy well beyond even those comparisons, and because the rupture sat at a shallow depth of roughly 10 kilometers, the ground directly above the epicenter absorbed nearly all of it. This is exactly why geologists never rely on magnitude alone when assessing danger. They weigh depth, fault type, proximity to population centers, local soil conditions, and building quality together. A magnitude 7.5 at 200 kilometers depth in a remote area is an entirely different event from a magnitude 7.5 at 10 kilometers depth directly beneath a major city. Same number, wildly different consequences. Understanding this matters, because the next time an earthquake notification pops up on your phone, you'll know that the magnitude figure alone never tells the whole story. Depth matters, location matters, and the quality of what's been built above the epicenter matters enormously. Istanbul, the city seismologists watch with quiet dread. While Venezuela is the most urgent crisis right now, and California is the most closely monitored long-term risk, there's another city that earthquake scientists keep a wary eye on: Istanbul, Turkey. Home to over 16 million people, Istanbul sits roughly 20 kilometers north of the North Anatolian Fault, one of the most active and thoroughly studied strike-slip faults on Earth. Across the 20th century, this fault produced a remarkably consistent sequence of major earthquakes that began in the east and marched progressively westward across Turkey, a pattern so predictable that scientists have used it to forecast where the next major rupture is likely to occur. The 1999 Izmit earthquake, magnitude 7.6, killed over 17,000 people and marked the most recent event in that westward march. The next segment of the fault in line, the locked section running directly beneath the Sea of Marmara, just south of Istanbul, hasn't produced a major earthquake since 1766, meaning over 250 years of accumulated stress. Researchers at the GFZ, German Research Center for Geosciences, have estimated that the stress built up along this segment corresponds to roughly 4.7 meters of displacement, the amount the fault needs to move to release all of that stored energy. When it finally does go, it will shift 4.7 meters in a matter of seconds. In April 2025, a magnitude 6.2 earthquake struck the Sea of Marmara, sending more than 350 people to the hospital and triggering mass panic across Istanbul, with residents fleeing into the streets at 2 in the morning. It caused no deaths, but it served as a visceral reminder of what the city lives permanently beside. Researchers have put the probability of a magnitude 7.3 or higher earthquake striking beneath Istanbul within the next 30 years at around 47%, essentially a coin flip. With roughly a third of that 30-year window already elapsed, the odds are only tightening. The same vulnerabilities that made Venezuela's disaster so much worse, older building stock, inconsistent enforcement of construction standards, and dense informal settlements, exist across large parts of Istanbul too. The city has been pursuing seismic retrofitting programs, but the scale of the task is enormous. Istanbul isn't Venezuela. Turkey has considerably more institutional capacity and international connections, but Istanbul isn't Tokyo either. The gap between where the city currently stands and where it needs to be is real, and the clock on the Marmara segment of the North Anatolian Fault keeps running. The seconds that save lives. One of the most important developments in earthquake science over the past decade has nothing to do with predicting earthquakes, which remains beyond current scientific capability, and everything to do with the handful of seconds between when a rupture begins and when the shaking actually reaches populated areas. Earthquake early warning systems work on a simple principle. When a fault ruptures, it generates two kinds of seismic waves: P waves, or primary waves, which travel fast but carry relatively little energy and cause minimal shaking, and S waves, or secondary waves, which travel slower but carry the violent shaking energy responsible for most building damage and casualties. By detecting the P waves the instant a rupture begins and immediately pushing out an alert, warning systems can give populated areas anywhere from seconds to tens of seconds of notice before the destructive S waves actually arrive. That sounds like almost nothing, but it's far from nothing. 10 seconds before major shaking begins is enough time to drop and take cover under a table or desk, protecting yourself from the falling objects responsible for the majority of earthquake injuries. It's enough time for a surgeon to pause mid-procedure in an operating room, enough time for a train to begin emergency braking before crossing a bridge or entering a tunnel, enough time for elevators to stop at the nearest floor and open their doors, enough time for industrial equipment to power down safely, enough time for a driver on the freeway to slow down and pull onto the shoulder. Japan has had an earthquake early warning system operational since 2007 and has continually refined it ever since. Alerts get pushed to mobile phones, broadcast over public systems, and integrated directly into transportation and industrial networks. The April 2026 Sanriku earthquake was detected and alerts went out within seconds, and the population responded exactly as they'd practiced, which is precisely why the final toll was 2 injuries and nothing worse. California's Shake Alert system, developed by the USGS and now active statewide, sends alerts through the MyShake app along with integrated government systems. The network detected a magnitude 5.7 event near Silver Springs, Nevada in 2026 and issued alerts accordingly. Engineers continue working to shorten the gap between detection and alert and to weave Shake Alert more deeply into building systems, transportation networks, and public infrastructure. Venezuela, by contrast, had no meaningful earthquake early warning system in place on June 24, 2026. There was no alert, no warning. Millions of people across La Guaira and Caracas had no indication whatsoever that the ground was about to shake for a full 60 seconds, until it already had. The difference between Venezuela and Japan was never luck. It's investment, preparation, and the political will to treat seismic risk as a serious engineering and infrastructure challenge rather than an abstract, someday problem.